to talk about is the housing decision. And this one is very fun to us because it's the biggest decision that people make as far as their domestic spending is concerned. We're going to look at some things. What would you describe as the ideal housing arrangement? I've never heard that before, but I think I heard somebody say free. Yes. Well, that wasn't exactly what I was thinking, but this is true. Let me give you a little illustration so you'll understand what I was actually thinking. Would it be an ideal housing arrangement for you to live in an apartment with people above you, below you, and both sides of you that all like to play loud rock music on Saturday? No, that would not be an ideal housing arrangement. Let's try to describe a housing arrangement that would be ideal. And free would be the last one on the list. Okay? So, first of all, what kind of a housing arrangement would be ideal? Living with your in-laws? No. Single family. All right, that's what we want to talk about. What else? Okay, mortgage free, paid off. Good. Good enough. Where should it be located? Bob's just starting to talk about that. Believe it or not, and he should know more than anybody in the room here, being outdoors is good for you. Because the air is generally fresher than indoors, isn't it? So working outdoors, this is taught in Bible and Spirit prophecy, working outdoors. And so, oh, by the way, we live in a country not to hide, but to be away from the noise, the pollution, the evil influences of the city. Is this true? To raise our families in a more safe location. That's important. By the way, I've given this seminar a number of times in New York City, probably 10 times, different boroughs of New York. And I remember going there after 9/11, the first time I was in the Roman Temple, I believe, and I told the people this same thing. In an ideal world, we would not be huddled together in large cities. Because God created man in his first ideal place, he put them in a garden. Isn't that incredible? And so it's an ideal situation that we understand. So an ideal housing arrangement would be, I'll just try to describe it, single family dwelling in a location where you can have a garden, probably a country location would be ideal. By the way, did you also know that Ellen White said on high ground? Did you know that? She actually says in Adventist Home, build your house on high ground. I can tell you as an attorney that almost all houses that are sold today have to pass approval of certain things, and one of them, the survey plat, tells you whether you're in a floodplain or not. 100-year floodplain. I just recently remembered that this is several years back now, but you remember when the Mississippi River flooded in St. Louis area? The river was like 13 miles wide. It's incredible. Well, people's houses were underwater. You could drive a boat right across the top of their house. And some poor young woman who was interviewing with a television station interviewed this man whose house had been underwater twice in 1 year. She said, why don't you just sell and move to high ground? What do you think he said?
Nobody.
Who would buy my house? The history has been underwater twice in 1 year. So he just has to rebuild it or abandon it. Do you understand? So high ground is important. And then, of course, paid off, and that's one that's very, very valuable. So we're going to look at some things now and see what it is. By the way, there are some advantages to renting. One of them is mobility. No hassle with trying to sell a house when you're ready to move. Fewer responsibilities. The owner typically handles the maintenance, the property taxes, and the casualty insurance. But if you do rent, should you have insurance?
Yes.
Yes, what kind? Renter's insurance. This is very important to know. Because if the house burns down, you lose your stuff otherwise. Lower initial cost when you get into the house or apartment, typically about 2 months rent for an advance deposit, that kind of thing. But renting is likely the best option for those who are seeking temporary housing, those who don't want the responsibility of home ownership, and those who don't have sufficient savings to make a down payment on a home. We're going to look at some of these disadvantages now. Renters don't enjoy the financial advantages that homeowners do. Now this is interesting because tenants can't deduct mortgage interest from their income taxes and their property taxes, or they can't benefit from home equity. Now what does this mean? This means that if you rent and you don't own for your adult life, what's going to happen to you in retirement? You're still going to be renting. That's the problem. So your goal would be to be a homeowner, but then to have it paid off by the time you get retirement or earlier. By the way, the Wall Street Journal and many other publications are now saying the very best thing you can do to save for your children's education is not start an education fund necessarily, because who knows whether they're going to go to college or not. But the best thing to do would be to prepay your home mortgage so that when they get college age, then your house is paid off. You can use what you used to pay on your home mortgage to send your kids through school. Does that make sense? Yeah. It does make sense. So we're going to see it now and talking about this. So here's the kinds of houses you could think of. A single-family dwelling, which we decided was ideal. Multi-unit dwelling, like a duplex, a townhouse, condo, cooperative living, a manufactured home, or a mobile home. Now I want to show you something. This is a picture of a mobile home. Doesn't it look so nice? It is called a mobile home, but it's never designed to be moved more than once. From the dealer's lot to your lot, and that's it. Assume you want to move to California. Would you take your mobile home with you? What would it look like when you got to California? It would have fallen apart. You just tear it down the road with just a frame behind it. That's all that's going. Listen, I told you I spent all of my early life in a mobile home. I understand what travel trailer is made to design to move, but not a mobile home. So here's the problems with mobile homes. They may lose value over time, making them difficult to sell. It is not always true, but typically, if you buy a stick-built house or a built house, what does it do over time? It should increase some in value. Now, even though we had the terrible crisis, 7, 8, 9, and 10 of the housing market in the United States, because Kathy and I had purchased a house, by the way, one that we could afford. By the way, the house that we could afford has blue vinyl siding. Was not my first choice, but it's a house we could afford. In fact, we've told God in prayer, you're going to see dementia the first time, it's all going to be done, right? So we've told God, please don't use blue vinyl siding. The reason I'm telling you that is, if you want a mansion, get to heaven. Is that the truth? Not that God doesn't want us to have nice housing here, but you should buy something you can afford. But mobile homes will lose their value over time, typically. Financing may be difficult to come by. Now, you know that the typical mortgage rates right now are around 4%. But I can just tell you that if you're financing a mobile home, you can get one for 4%? No. It's going to be 6, 8, 10% for a mobile home. And then there might be poor construction quality. Some of them are very good, some aren't. But anyway, here's your dream house. You may not get all the features you want in your first home, but financial advisors suggest that you get into the housing market by purchasing what you can afford. As you move up in the housing market, your second or third home can include more of the features that you want. And that's important. You're ready to buy a home when your debts are either paid off or under control. You have a 20% down payment to avoid private mortgage insurance. I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. By the way, it's very interesting to me. How many times does an average family buy a house in their lifetime? Once, twice, maybe 3 times. Are you an expert then? No. Who's the expert? The people selling houses are typically, unless it's by owner or whatever, closing agents. They know what they're talking about. They know what they're doing. So when they had these loans that Countrywide Mortgage was peddling, that were Nino loans, no income, no asset verification, you could borrow $459,000 without even showing that you had a job. Do you understand? They're faulting the customer for those loans. But do you think the mortgage company knew that people weren't going to be able to pay the mortgages? You understand? It's just a terrible mess back in those days. So what I can tell you is, you want to avoid private mortgage insurance, and I'll talk to you about that in just a minute. And then you're ready to buy a home and you can afford the monthly payments, including taxes and insurance, usually not more than 35% of your gross income. Now this is important because some of the loans that were given to people just before the crash, they had to spend 60 or 65% of their gross income just to make the payments on the houses, which was way out of line, way out of sight. Very incredible. So how do you pay off your mortgage? Because of the severely inflated home prices, buyers have few options if they want to purchase a home other than a traditional home mortgage for either 15 or 30 years. And then they can accelerate the payment of the mortgage by prepaying principal. In an ideal world, if you follow biblical principles, how long should you be in debt at maximum? 7 years. So the reason that houses cost so much is because credit is available. If credit were not available, the houses would not cost nearly so much today. Most of us know that. So we've kind of created a problem here in America. So we're going to talk about private mortgage insurance just really quickly. It protects lenders from foreclosure, but foreclosure loss due to their risk of making these loans that exceeded 80% of the home's market value. Private mortgage insurance allows lenders to give loans to potential homeowners who have little or no cash saved up for the down payment. So the interesting thing is, borrowers should note that private mortgage insurance, which can be canceled under certain circumstances, that is if you get 20% equity in your house. By the way, it should be about 1%. So you can understand that you pay that every month, not for your benefit, but for the benefit of the lender. That's what the private mortgage insurance. And if you could cancel your private mortgage insurance, you'd put all that money on your mortgage, and that would go on principal, of course. Now, FHA lenders are protected by mutual mortgage insurance, or MMI, and such policies can only be canceled by paying off the mortgage. So even if you get 20% equity in an FHA loan, you're not going to get that to stop. You either have to pay it off or refinance to get that to drop. Very interesting. So the simplest way to avoid private mortgage insurance is to have a 20% down payment, and then private mortgage insurance never becomes an issue. So the big decision. This is on page 24 of your book. If you want to open to there, you can fill in some things. A big decision. Now, I want to show you something interesting about this. For most people, it's the largest purchase that they make. Should they make it with wisdom? Sure. So they need to seek counsel about it. Not just from a real estate agent, but maybe go to a seminar, something like that. Location, 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 because you should be putting your house in a place that's growing in value, not in a declining neighborhood. You want the best house in the community? Typically not. So you understand these kinds of things. I want to talk about the 30-year mortgage. And look at the bottom here. This is the typical U.S. mortgage, 30-year mortgage. Before I tell you about this, I will tell you that they now have 40-year mortgages available in the United States. And as I mentioned last evening, I believe, if you live in Japan, you can get a 100-year mortgage. It actually takes 3 generations to pay one off. And then when you get paid off, you have no garden spot. You're at like the 10th floor of a high-rise apartment kind of a place. But you own it, kind of like a condo. I was doing this seminar at a big camp meeting. And a man came to me who I knew, he was a pastor. And listen to the numbers now. Try to keep these numbers in your head. He's 63 years old. And he said to me, I know this will be my last church district, and we just love it here. So we've decided to build our retirement home right in this community. And he said, I just wish you had been here 2 weeks ago. And I said, well, why? And he said, well, 2 weeks ago, my wife and I signed a mortgage for our retirement home for 40 years. So how old will this guy be when he gets his house paid off? 103 years old, right? As a financial counselor, I'm never supposed to appear shocked. I just hear everything. I mean, I've talked to people with $185,000 on credit cards alone. This is incredible. But I know I couldn't hide it. So I just said to this man, what were you thinking about? We're all going to be up in heaven enjoying the millennium, and you're going to be down here paying on your house. This reminds me of something else. Someone always comes to me and says, I know you're really down with debt, but I have this wonderful idea. And the idea is, why don't all of us get a line of credit on our house and get the cash value out of our credit cards and all that stuff, pool all the money, and quickly finish the work, and thumb our nose in the devil, way to heaven, and say, you take care of this during the millennium, pay it all off the best you can. Sounds kind of fun, doesn't it? Except for what problem? Well, the most interesting part about it is, just before Jesus comes, as we talk in the morning session, there's going to be a time of trouble such that there never was since there was a nation on the earth. The people that are in debt are going to have the hardest time of it. So it doesn't happen as quickly as we thought it might. Your best plan is to be debt-free. That's the bottom line. Okay, now we're going to look at the 30-year mortgage. A young couple gets married and they decide, instead of just renting, we're going to buy ourselves a house. What kind of a house can a young couple typically afford? We have a term of art for this. It's called a starter house. This is exactly right. What kind? It's not your dream house by any stretch of the imagination, but it is what you can afford at that time. So they purchase their starter house and they move in and start making payments, and pretty soon they start their family, and they send their little children through preschool and elementary school, academy, and college. And you can do all of that in how many years? About 20 years, right? So what are mom and dad still doing with the starter house? They still got 10 years worth of payments, right? Do you think that's typical? You think it is typical? It is not. What typically happens is once the family starts, Mother and Dad look at the newspaper or the real estate section to take a drive into a new open house community and start looking at houses. Oh, wonderful. This is closer to church school than where we live now, closer to the mall. This would be really, really nice. You fall in love with some house and you sell your house that you've been paying on for all these years, take what little equity you have in it, and put it as a down payment for your next house. And believe it or not, they will finance it for another, 30 years. So this is really, really incredible. The goal should be to get out of debt as soon as possible. So that's what we're going to talk about. Oh, one other thing. Somebody once told me, and I know that Carolina has a brain trust with the United States. You guys have, what do they call this triangle around here? Research triangle. More smart people live here than anywhere in America, I really believe. Maybe Silicon Valley, San Jose, South Bay Area may have a close second, I don't know. But you guys are really smart here. And if I were at the Charlotte, North Carolina church, they had, I don't know, 10 CPAs there. But somebody told me one time, my CPA told me not to pay off my house because I need the interest deduction. If your CPA tells you that, what time is it? Time to get a new CPA. Very simple. You guys all got the right answer. I knew you were smart. Here's the deal. It's not a good deal to spend $1 to save a quarter. You get the point? You are better off debt-free than getting the interest deduction. That's important. Obviously, you want to take the interest deduction as long as you can, but your goal is to get debt-free. Okay, let's go on to the next one here. Now, I'm not going to go through page 25. We're going to skip that page because it takes a lot of time. It's just a little simple thing. Things you think about, and this is on page 26 now in the workbook. Things to consider when you are thinking about a loan. I've got 8 things down here. Borrow as little as possible. Why would I say that? Because you have to pay it back with interest. Okay? The second one, stretch it out as long as you can. No. Make the payback term as short as possible. That's very important to know. Then, try to get a variable rate of interest. No way. Have a fixed rate of interest if possible. This is very, very valuable for you to know. A fixed rate that will not fluctuate. And then number 4 is be sure there's no prepayment penalty. What is the prepayment penalty? The lenders have fixed up some of these loans that say, you can pay us off anytime you want to. But if you pay it early, you still have to pay all or part of the interest. You see what I'm saying? So you want to make sure there's no prepayment penalty. And they used to put these on home mortgages, that you couldn't pay your loan off for the first 5 years or whatever, because that's when they're really making money. The real interesting part about this is, the best thing, I'm not going to sign this loan unless you type right on the contract there's no prepayment penalty. Does everybody understand that? Don't think it's only boilerplate. They want to sell you this loan. So you just have it right on here. There is no prepayment penalty, which means you can pay it off, or any portion of it, anytime you want to, and save the interest that would go along with it. You're going to see when we're going to talk about this in just a minute. Avoid personal surety. This is not always possible, but make the collateral be whatever you're financing rather than all of your assets. That's the point there. Shop for the money. That means looking around for the best rates. Do not purchase credit life insurance. When did I tell you guys about that? Was that last night or this morning? This morning. Okay, so I don't have to repeat it. You understand there's 4 good reasons not to. The first one being you have to die to win. But remember the interesting part about this, and several people asked me during the break and also during lunch today, was Ellen White opposed to life insurance? She did talk about the dangers of life insurance a couple of places, but she encouraged insurance, especially casualty insurance. And the White Estate has written a paper now about life insurance that would encourage you, using the counsel of Ellen White, to have simple term policy. Do not think of life insurance as an investment. Does everybody understand that? In other words, what you're thinking about it is only one thing, pure life insurance to protect you. That is the breadwinner if you should die prematurely so you don't leave your family in a lurch. The typical best kind is a simple term policy. You cannot insure yourself against every eventuality. But one thing you can do is have a simple policy. So if I, as the breadwinner, were to pass away, that would mean I would not leave Kathy and my family during the time that they were younger, and we had debts in a lurch. Do you understand? By the way, after your term policy is up and you're debt-free, do you really need insurance? No, because insurance is for the survivors, and you're leaving them a good nest egg. Okay. Then the following one is know what you're doing, attend a seminar, and so on. Now we're going to look at something at the bottom. And this is way out of whack as compared to today. But I can still make the points with it. You're going to compare a $60,000 mortgage. Most mortgages now are over $200,000, but this is a $60,000 at 12%. Remember that most rents now, if you have good credit, you can get one for around 4%. But look at what I want to show you here. The conventional mortgage for this loan that we just described there, $60,000, is $617 a month. You pay on it for 30 years, and the interest only that you pay back, everybody pays back the $60,000, but the interest only, $162,181. Everybody see that? We're going across that line there. If you did only one thing different, and that is you made your payments on a bi-weekly payment, the payments would be half of the regular payment every 2 weeks, $308. You'd pay off the loan in 19 years, thereby saving yourself 11 years worth of past payments. And you save nearly $70,000 in interest that you never have to pay. Now, I would recommend this, except there's something even better that I want to show you in just a minute, and that's over here. If you were to look through this book last night when you first got it, you thought, this is the most boring page. I would never want to look at this at all. But I want you to see something. You'll probably need a book to look at because I'm sure that the numbers are too small for you to see there. The main reason we put it on the screen is so you can see where it is in the book. This is called an amortization schedule. Same loan, $60,000, 12%, 30 years. Everybody must understand that all of the payments, 360 payments, are exactly alike. And that is $617.17. Except the very last one may be a little bit different, a little bit higher, a little bit lower, several dollars. Not much. You understand what's left? Okay. Now look in the first year here. This is pretty amazing. When I make my first payment of $617, $600 goes to the bank for interest. Only $17 goes to my loan to reduce the loan. I still owe $59,982. So look at the first year totals. This is in bold print now. That is, after the first year, I've given the bank $7,188.26, and I've only reduced my loan by $217. So does anybody remember how much money that Kathy and I made on our yard sale? $265. Now, this is only for illustration purposes, but we actually did this. We told Andrew and Melissa that because you helped get out your stuff here and helped deliver stuff out to people's cars and so on, that we're going to treat you when it's over. So, after we made the $265, by the way, did we tithe that money?
Yes.
Why not? We sold everything for a loss. We didn't really make anything on it. So anyway, here's the story. We did thank the Lord, of course. But we went to Taco Bell and everyone with vegetarian burrito supper and drinks for $20. How much did that leave us? $245. Now look carefully at the total amount of principal that would be paid if I made all of the payments in the second year. How much would go to reduce the loan? $245. Everybody see that? Now here's the interesting part. If in December we had our yard sale and brought in an additional $245 and put that on our mortgage in December, what would we just accomplish by that? We paid all of the second year mortgage at one time and saved $7,160 of interest that I never have to pay. Does this make sense? It's absolutely true. Oh, by the way, nearly everybody in here has a cell phone. Most of you have calculators on them. If you divide 245 into 7,160, it goes 29 times. That means we just made 2,900% interest in one day of money that we paid on our home mortgage. Is that incredible or not? You can understand how valuable this would be then to do such a thing. So I'm going to give you another couple points that are probably pretty interesting. Most of you know that up until recently, now it's a little bit more, you could put $2,000 away tax-free in an IRA or some tax shelter program. My suggestion to people, instead of putting it in a tax shelter thing, which means tax deferred, because you never ever get out from under tax, you just have to pay it later, when hopefully you're in a lower tax bracket, and that kind of thing. But at any rate, if I put $2,000 into an IRA as a young man, I can't touch it till I get age 59 and a half without paying a penalty, right? Even though it's my money. This is interesting. And then when it does come out as present income, it has to be taxed at my present income rate. So I tell people, if you have $2,000, why not put it on your home mortgage? So notice what would happen. If in December I put $2,000 on my home mortgage, some interesting thing happens. If I start adding up, starting with $19.35, which would be the first payment of the second year. You see where the first payment of the second year is? It's right below $217. It's $19.35. This is most fun if you have an adding machine that has a paper on it, because it keeps going up and up and up. So you just start adding 1935, 1954, 1974, 19 so on. You would get clear down, listen carefully. It would take 6 years off the mortgage and save you $42,000 in interest by just putting $2,000 on it right there. Is that worth it? And oh, by the way, that's 2,100% return on investment. And if you put the money in an IRA, if you have a good one, what kind of interest would you be getting there? 1%. Well, it's very low, 1 or 2%. I mean, this is incredible. So why not do that? I think it's very valuable to think about. One other thing I'll just tell you. Since I'm looking at the first part here, I want to stay in the same area. Let's just say that I want to pay some extra money on my second year in December. And the best way I could do that is this way. My wife's mother, who's passed away now, she would send Kathy and I each $100 for Christmas. Early on, my parents, she would send us a shirt or something, you know, a nice shirt or whatever, or several things like that. But later on, she didn't know how big we'd gotten or what size we liked or whatever, so she would send us money. So I would write her a letter and say, thank you for the $100, you know, we'll use it wisely or whatever. But then I got this idea. What would the $100 do on my home mortgage? So if you look at year number 2 here, something interesting comes out. And it's this. I could say 19 and 19 and 19 and 19 and 20. You get it? Everybody follow me there? You add those up. It's not $100. It's less than $100. So I said exactly the amount that it adds up. And I don't want to add it to them recently, so I'm just going to say it's $96.10. So I would send that exact amount into my home mortgage and write it extra principal. Because I used to say to my mother-in-law, I bought myself 4 new dress shirts at Penny's. And she would say, well, you know, thank you, we're glad we were able to help, and so on. But this time, I said, we put that $100 on our home mortgage. And oh, by the way, look over here at the interest column now. 597, 597, 597, 597, 597, 596. Everybody see that? Let's just say it's $600. It's so close. What's 5 times 6? $3,000. I said to my mother-in-law, that $100 we put on our home mortgage just saved ourselves $3,000 and paid 5 house payments. Then she writes back and says, that's my boy. You get the idea. You want to make people proud of you because you've done things wisely. So that's the whole idea. Now, I've brought up several things, and I'm going to let you guys ask some questions right now because this is very, very important stuff. If you prepay on your mortgage, you must indicate in writing that you want this to go on the mortgage. If you just send a check for $100, which I would never do, you want to make it an exact amount of multiple of payments to the penny. Because you're using the amortization schedule they gave you at the closing of your home loan. By the way, if you don't have a more amortization, you should write the company that's financing your house, ask for an amortization schedule. They can charge you up to $10 for it after the fact. You can get it free at the home closing, but if you don't know where it is it worth paying $10 to save thousands of dollars? You understand it's surely to your advantage. But they say you have to tell us in writing. So I'm saying, well, you know, my home loan's been sold. Somebody in Albuquerque, New Mexico has it now, and I don't know what to do. Whether it's a man or lady that opens the mail, whether it's dear sir and dear ma'am, I'm going to write this letter every no. All you have to do is put on the memo line of your check, extra principal for so-and-so, and that's all the writing that's required. Does everybody understand that? But if you don't put it like that, or if you have a coupon like some of the new mortgages have, there's a line that says extra mortgage amount, you can put the money in there, that's the writing that's required. If you don't put it on that line, you just send them extra money, listen carefully. Some banks are unscrupulous. Did you hear what I just said? Some banks are unscrupulous. If you send extra money, you don't specify it goes on the principal, they'll put it in your escrow account for taxes and insurance even though you don't need it there. Because you didn't tell them, they asked you to tell them. So those are important things to know. Okay, while we're on this page, anybody have a question or comment? Oh, by the way, I will tell you one other thing while you think about your question. A church this size would not be this kind of church, but I have been to churches that were essentially family churches, which means that almost everybody in church is related to somebody else there. So I was at a church, and a young man stood up at the end of this presentation and said, I have a comment. And this young man was a CPA, graduate of Vanderbilt University. And he said, Elder Reid, I would hate to think these people could leave this church today and believe they could do what you just said. It's just too good to be true. And if it's too good to be true, it is too good to be true. So I happen to know this young man, and I know that he didn't try to embarrass me in front of all his friends, but he just felt that since he was the educated man, he should tell people. So I said, let's go back through it. So let's look at it here. At the end of the first year, what is your balance? $59,782. Everybody see that? If I add $245, what's my balance at the end of the first year? Then, $59,536. Does everybody see that? I went down through that with him, and he said, oh, they didn't teach me that at Vanderbilt. You're right. It is true. It's not illegal. There's nothing wrong with it. You're just using your head and your pocket to get quickly out of debt. You see what I'm saying? Now, by the way, if you did a bi-weekly payment thing, that means you're making half a payment every 2 weeks. You'd be making how many full payments? 26 of them. So that means that every year you're making an extra full payment in the year. But why not just prepay principal anytime you want to? You've set up your mortgage, so I will just tell you, probably with the cost of housing today, it would not be possible to get a 7-year loan and qualify for it. But you can get what you can qualify for, which would be a 30 or a 15-year mortgage, you understand, and then try your very best to prepay it and stay within that period of time. Does that make sense? So I'm just going to tell you, you can do it, and it will be very, very helpful to you. But if you do this, it doesn't mean you have to do it every month. It means you can do it whenever you want to. That's the point. So that's the neat thing. But you must have a loan that does not have a prepayment penalty. Okay, we'll take a few questions if anybody has one. Yes, please.
Most amortization schedules are online.
Yes, that's a good point. You can, the only question I would have, I can type in my stuff and get an amortization schedule. It's very good. Mortgage companies have them on there. But you want to make sure that your lending institution approves of that one, because it might be off by 2 cents.
I mean the one that's for your loan.
Wonderful. Good deal.
On your account.
Yeah.
It's the whole schedule.
A man, this is pretty interesting, what's online today. I was just up in Stevens County, Washington. A gentleman has donated some property out his World Radio. And I decided that I would find out more I could about the property. You can get online anywhere in America and find out who owns any property in Stevens County, what they paid for it, and what the taxes are. This is incredible. Thank you very much for that. So the point is you can get online and find out your amortization schedule, is what she said, and print it off so you know where you are. There's another reason for doing that. If I'm going to make a whole year's worth of payments at one time, what I would do is take a yellow magic marker, right? You'll scratch through all of those and then write date so-and-so that you paid that amount, what your balance is. Because the average person will get a note in the mail from a CPA firm, and they'll say, we're auditing the bank's records. According to their records, on a certain date you owe this much to the bank. What does the average person do with that? Throw it in the trash. Because they say, these people are CPAs, the banks hardly ever make mistakes, and everybody knows what's going on, that's probably what I owe. But if you are prepaying mortgage, you can simply look at your amortization schedule, see what you've written in there, and what your balance is on that date. So I ask people sometimes, do you know how much you owe on your house? Guess what they say? I have no idea. I just know I've got 26 more years. You get the point? So you want to pay that thing off as quickly as possible. Yes, please.
I just want to make sure that I've got this straight, because it does sound too good to be true. And it's very exciting to me, because this is one thing that I really want to do. And I've been praying for it for a very long time.
Let me just add one thing before you answer your question.
Yeah.
And it's probably in line with this. No matter how many payments you prepay, next month you still owe a full payment.
No, I understand.
You understand that part?
Yeah,
All right.
that's fine. I understand.
You don't just rest for a whole year and start
Yeah,
paying.
no, but and I do understand, and I'm not very wise with money, unfortunately.
Yes,
I'm
okay.
learning. But I just want to make sure I understand this correctly with my limitations. If I were, based on year 2, $145.37,
Yes.
I would prepay that on principal. I actually know how to do that online.
Yes. Oh, wonderful.
So there's actually an entry there, and I've seen that before, wondering what it's all about. You just explained it, and praise God. So what I'm getting out of that is if I pay that amount of principal, I have paid the principal for an entire year.
Correct.
Does that then mean that that 1 year worth of interest has been taken care of?
Yes. And
That's what I wanted to know.
here's the reason. You can just block this and hit delete.
Yeah,
You see what I'm saying? But that means your whole mortgage moves up closer to you. The year you save is off the end of the mortgage.
yeah.
You see what I'm saying?
So if I
So
have
it
a
keeps
30
creeping up closer and closer
So
to
if
you.
I have a 30-year loan,
Yes.
which I do, and I'm not at 30 years now, but too close to it. When I make that payment on principal, I now took 30, I'm now 25.
Yes,
And
exactly.
if I do it again, I'm at 28.
Correct.
And I can do this at 200 and whatever, however it's advertised. I can do it every time I can. I can actually pay a year off.
Yes. Let me just add one other thing to that. This is important. Let's have a little discussion here. It's important to understand that some banks are unscrupulous. So I've had people come to me or call me on Monday after the seminar and say, well, my bank said, I bet she showed you the first couple of years, didn't it? Well, you've been paying on your house for 5 years, so, it's not such a big deal. You should probably just keep doing what you're doing. Is that true? No. In this loan, you pay on it for 25 and a half years before you reach the halfway point where half of it is principal and half is interest. So it is always to your advantage to prepay. Yes, please, Suzanne, you have a comment.
Yeah, the thing I was gonna say though is that as you make every payment, more goes toward principal, less goes toward interest. So when you get to year 25 or so,
Yeah.
you might be, your principal is more likely gonna be like the $600 or, $500 column per month. So, to pay a whole year at the end of the loan, it's gonna be a whole lot more than you pay for interest.
It is always easier to prepay early on as far as the benefit you get. But you could still make 2 payments, 25 and a half years into that mortgage by making 1 payment and half of another.
Okay, so here's another question. You gave us a concept that I also am going to adopt and it's very exciting to me, and that is that to make a covenant with God, that any extra money that comes in, we will put it towards the debt.
Yes.
Okay? I love that. And which tells me too that God will probably give you more money.
Oh, yes, I
towards
believe
your
it's
money,
true.
because that's the way He works. So, since I, praise God, and by miracle, have paid off all of my other debt, the only debt I have is my mortgage. And I want out of under that as bad as I want to breathe. I don't know why, I just do. So if I were to get some extra money throughout the year, and I decided I'm going to put that towards the principal, how is that going to affect, how do we calculate how that's going to affect what I'm at in the cycle?
Well, you just use the amortization schedule that's specific for your mortgage, and after each payment, remember, pay it in specific multiples of your payments. So and Suzanne's mentioned something good, because what it is each time you pay on a loan, the principal amount that you pay is taken off the unpaid balance to the point that you pay less interest compared to the one before. In this case, only $1 or $2 each month, but it is different. The real interesting part about all of this is that you're then in control of it. You know what your payments are, you know what you're doing, you can see, you feel a lot better about it. Okay? Yes, please.
What if you have a loan that does carry a prepayment penalty?
I would ask for the term of it. Loans that have a prepayment penalty are typically only for the first 5 years, not for the whole amount, so you don't refinance. But determine whether or not there is one first, to make sure that you know whether or not there is. Find out the terms of it. You could actually prepay the whole loan. That is never violated. And get refinancing for a different company with no prepayment penalty. You might think of that. And those are just options that you have. It would not be for the whole term of the loan, I wouldn't think.
So you're saying just prepay, just try to pay off the term that carries the penalty with it?
Yes, I would think that would be the best thing for you.
I guess just in keeping with that, if we find that we do have a mortgage that has this penalty, would you recommend, or is it an option to refinance with another company?
Yes.
Another loan that does not have that penalty?
Yes, I just mentioned that.
Okay, I just want to make sure I understand.
I'll just tell you another thing. Believe it or not, people get very creative in the financial world. And I'll give you this illustration. A lady came to me one time and she had $5,000 or $6,000 on a Sears card. And she said, I cannot make these payments. I don't know what to do because they keep adding so much interest and so on. And I said, well, do you have any dispute of what's on your card? Did you actually make the purchase? And she said, yes. I said, would you like me to call Sears and see if they will withhold the finance charges for a period of time so you can make headway on the principal? She says, would they do that? I said, I don't know, but we can always try. So I called the guy named Mr. Pitchford, in the Southeastern Credit Manager for Sears in Atlanta. And I said, I have a lady in my office who is pretty hard up financially, and she would like to pay you off, but she just can't afford it. So what I'm going to ask you is, would you guys be willing to withhold your finance charges for a period of 1 year so she can make headway on the principal? And Mr. Pitchford said to me, Mr. Reid, I don't think you know what you're asking me to do. I said, oh, yes, I do. He said, he told me this with his own mouth. Sears makes more money on the finance charges it charges its customers than on the market of the property, the materials that they sell. And so you're asking us to cut out our profit. That's what he said to me. So I said to this Mr. Pitchford, I said, Mr. Pitchford, maybe you weren't listening to me. Do you want the principal or nothing? The lady is about to file for bankruptcy protection. Then he says, now you speak my language. So, you understand the language point? So you can always mitigate things. That's what I'm talking about. So he said, will she pay us $50 a month and it can all go on principal? I said, yes. So she actually came back a year later and she was so happy. Wasn't even a member of our church, but had come to my office, the conference office. And she said, Elder Reid, I'm just tickled. I've paid Sears off. Isn't that incredible? So they got their money, but they were out only the interest they would have charged her. So the reason I'm telling you that is, if you have one of these loans that will not require, I believe you could probably call them and have it canceled. I'm going to pay you off and finance with somebody else. Or you drop the penalty. See what I'm saying? You can do that. Be very nice about it, but be certain. Okay. Yes, please.
I just wanted to mention what you were telling everybody. That's exactly what my husband and I did. I'm with good people. And I had the amortization scheduled for 30 years. Besides each column, I would put check and date paid, and I would always prepay whatever we could afford at that time. And by that, 2 checks. One was the regular payment, one was the principal only. Always, like he said, principal only, and beside each one, I would put down the date and the check. And that way you have your records, you know exactly what you paid, and if you came to court, you can.
This is very businesslike and very appropriate, yes. That way you know you're getting proper credit for it. So whenever you get your statement from the bank, you can look at it and make sure that it's correct. Okay? Any other? Yes, please. You could. The question is, could you make an extra principal payment? Let's just say $500. Yeah. You could, but remember that would throw off the amortization schedule because you're making several payments and then half of another one or something. So I would think that it would be better for your interest for you to actually add up as many as you can and send that exact amount. Then you always know where you are. That's the only advantage of doing that. Okay. Yeah, sometimes people say, well, I sent in $1,000, I sent $500 or $200, whatever, but then you don't know for sure whether the bank gave you proper credit for it, and then they have to redo your amortization schedule because you sent that amount. Yes, please.
I just had a question on this concept of being debt-free, and where do you feel that retirement investment falls into that with debt-free with mortgage? Where do you put
Good question. She's talking about, what about retirement savings and getting out of debt and so on. One of the very best things you can do for planning for retirement is to be debt-free. Because if you are debt-free, you can live that much cheaper during retirement. So I can just tell you, and this is a very good question, we're going to actually talk about retirement in just a few minutes, but What I will tell you is, if your company will give you some money and match what you put in it, you see what I'm saying? You understand that? I would always give enough to get the full match, but not more than that. The rest of it, any extra money I had, I would put on my debts. Because you can't turn your back on free money. You know, that's important. Yes, please.
Should I focus on helping my child with college or saving for my retirement?
Well, I really can't make decisions for people, but I can just tell you that the child's education is very, very valuable. And making sure they get an education that will be a job available when they're done, you know, those kinds of things, health field or whatever, computers, whatever. It's whether you know there's a job. That would be very valuable because you can't just say, well, you're on your own, I'm going to pay off the house. So I think probably the priority would be for my children in your case. But at the same time, anytime you had extra money, put it on the principal of your home or any other debts that you have. That's just my own personal philosophy. You make a decision yourself about that. Yes, please.
Does the same logic that you were talking about for personal people hold for a group like a church? So this church has a mortgage on that building over there.
Yes.
However, that mortgage is through the Southern Union Revolving Fund, which means that every single investor in that fund is a dedicated admin. Should we try to bust our tails and pay that building off, or should we invest in our school?
Well, that's a good question. It's very practical, and I'm not sure that I want to answer it, but I'll give you my opinion. So this is not definitive. If I'm paying interest on my house, even though it's tax deductible, it's still coming out of my pocket. You understand? So nobody benefits from that. But there's nobody that benefits for interest that you pay here except the Southern Union Revolving Fund, which is helping other people build churches. So my suggestion is this. Use those kinds of loans that also the interest helps to advance the cause of God, who can help other churches and so on build. Ellen White would counsel people, oh, by the way, you guys need to write this down. 6 testimonies, 440, 441. Volume 6 of the testimonies, 440, 441. The question is, should we be building buildings near the end of time? Is it a good question or not?
What is the question?
It's very good. 6 testimonies, page 440, 441. And she calls it the increase of facilities. And the bottom line is very simple. And that is, since the Lord is soon to come, we should build all the institutions that we need to train our children and help finish the work. Period. And if the Lord comes back and finds you building a building, He will say, well done. That's the answer. It's right there. It's very simple. But the bottom line is, the question this gentleman asked is, if you need to borrow to build a building, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but you should work together to pay it off as quickly as possible. Don't just let the amortization run for years and years and years. That's what I would say. Does that make sense? Pay it off as quickly as possible. Ellen White would say the same thing. Every family should have a self-denial box in which they put in all which they don't actually need. So even children can make money on Sabbath. Now, this sounds like a big amount that you have over $1 million, but it's not in today's economy. But, you know, you can pay on that, I don't know how long, 20 years or whatever, but wouldn't it make sense? When Kathy and I joined the North Knoxville, Tennessee church, they had built they haven't built the sanctuary yet, but we have a fellowship hall, classrooms, and an office, and so on. And they were paying on a mortgage. It was only $40,000. We were getting ready to have some kind of an anniversary, 10-year anniversary or whatever, homecoming. And I said, why don't we pay off the mortgage? And we're just new there. Why should I even have anything to say about it? But I said, why don't we pay off the mortgage? We paid off the mortgage. Nobody's benefiting from it. Not anybody in our church. Do you see what I'm saying? We paid it off, and now we're starting to save up for our new church building. It makes sense to me, the very best we can do. And Ellen White even talks to it, a God-dishonoring debt that's carried on for years and years and years. Now, I mean, really, I have a whole paper I wrote on this, but I will just tell you that it is not sinful to borrow, but we should pay it off as quickly as we can. So we work together to do that. I remember when Kathy and I were at Bath Academy years ago, something interesting happened there. Somebody had the bright idea, why don't we build a church on the campus? This is an Alabama, Mississippi, or Gulf States Conference. And I was the pastor, and I was really busy. I was teaching all 4 Bible classes at the academy and health class. And I didn't really need a building program, but I kind of liked the idea, let's build something for God. By the way, it is a privilege to build a house for God. Don't change your membership someplace where they don't have a debt. It is a privilege to build a house for God. So the real interesting part was we said, well, the church we need to build, and by the way, we were having assemblies and chapels and all kinds of stuff, and Saturday night programs and movies and popcorn and all that stuff in the fellowship auditorium on the campus. And that was our church on Sabbath. You see what I'm saying? This wasn't very worshipful. So we decided we need to build a house for God. There's only like 60 members who live in the community with the staff in the community, but we needed to build a church that would seat 400 people for all the students and everyone to be there. But we said to God, that's when I found the statement, 6 Testimonies 4:4-41, should we be building? At any rate, we said, let's do it. But then we had people who made sacrificial commitments to make sure we had a church. The bottom line is, I'll just tell you what Kathy and I did. We're a young couple, and I think we're in our late 20s, maybe early 30s. I had always wanted to have a boat. I remember as a young person, there's this A&M custom place that made these beautiful boats in Paradise, California, where I live. It's an inboard motorboat, very, real powerful and everything, with ski bind and all that. I thought, when I get to be a man, I'm going to buy myself a boat. And I didn't have a boat or anything, but when we left Loma Linda, I said to Kathy, it won't be long till we'll get a boat. So we went down to A&M Custom in California, Anaheim, California, and we had a custom boat trailer made. Really awesome. You guys have only seen these in movies, probably, pictures. But this one had chrome reverse wheels on it, sat kind of low to the ground, real wide for a big jet boat or something. But I didn't have a boat, we just bought the trailer. Because they're sold separately, typically. Anyway, we built a flat floor on that and put 4-foot sides around the plywood. We moved ourselves from California back to Mississippi, where we were going to serve at Westmoreland Academy. And when we decided that we were going to build this house for God, Kathy and I looked at each other and said, we can't ask these people to sacrifice if we're not willing to sacrifice. So guess what I did? We took the flat bottom off of that trailer, back into a boat trailer. Awesome A&M custom boat trailer. Tandem axle, chrome wheels, awesome boat trailer. Anyway, we put it on the market and sold it for $1,000. That was more than we paid for it, just the trailer. And we put that on the building fund. That encouraged people to sell cows, to sell land, to sell all kinds of stuff. And we built that brand new church with crystal chandeliers, with leaded crystal from Czechoslovakia, a big pipe organ, electronic pipe organ, a grand piano, and all that stuff. Paid for it in 3 years. Wow. But we have to all work together. You can't look out in the audience and see people in the face and recognize whether or not they have any money. I know a lady who lives in a mobile home in a remote part of Oregon who is a multi-millionaire. Now what I'm going to tell you is really amazing. Do you think God wants you in debt? No. Well, what do you think He's going to do? I don't know who the treasurer is here, but I will guarantee you one thing. The treasurer has never received a check signed by God. What's God's plan? To bless us if we return the checks. Isn't it true? That's what happens. So what I'm going to say is, it is not bad to borrow if it's necessary to improve the equipment and to do a witness in the community, but let's pay it off as quickly as we can. Does that make sense? Okay, enough said on that. We're going back to housing now. Larry Burkett, in his book, he's the late Larry Burkett. Some of you remember Larry Burkett. I mentioned him several times, but he's the one that did the seminar, Your Finances in Changing Times. He was on the radio as a Baptist, not a preacher, just a Baptist layman, businessman. He was on more than 1,000 radio stations in the United States, and not one station charged them a cent for it. It was so popular they were able to finance it and support it from supporters in the local community. Very, very interesting guy. So at any rate, Larry wrote this book, Investing for the Future. Page 142, he says, "It is my strong conviction that becoming debt-free, including the home mortgage, should be the first investment goal for any young couple or person. Once you've achieved that goal, then and only then should you invest in other areas." Isn't that important? Very interesting. Ellen White said something interesting also right along with that. Adventist Home 395. Had brother and sister B been economical managers denying themselves, they could ere this or before this have had a home of their own, and besides this had means to draw upon in case of adversity. By the way, it's kind of interesting that you first have your house and then you start saving up for other stuff. So I understand that some of you have been through the Dave Ramsey material. Now here's the deal. Dave Ramsey is an interesting guy, and one of the first things he drums on is save $1,000. Did you guys get that part? And that's kind of a big deal because most people have no savings. Save $1,000. So if your car breaks down or your refrigerator goes out or the freezer goes out or whatever, you can buy it without putting it on your credit card. It's pretty simple. Always have $1,000. Well, Ellen White says, let's pay off our house, let's have means in case of diversity. Those are the things she mentioned. Then she says this, we're not to feel disturbed if our neighbors build and furnish their houses in a manner that we are not authorized to follow. What do you think that means? Well, we all have that expression, keeping up with the Joneses. Most of us have a tendency to think that everybody in the world thinks just like us. I think it should be our highest aim in life to get ready for heaven. You've seen that several times in the program here. There are some people living on this earth in North Carolina who are not planning to go to heaven. Is this true? They're not even planning to go to heaven. So if they want a mansion, they need it now, because they're not going to have one. But we know that we need basic housing, nice housing if necessary, to entertain or what have you, but our real mansion is going to be in heaven. In fact, I think that most mansions here will look like little shacks compared to what God has for us in heaven. What do you think? Pretty, I mean, if the streets are paved with gold, what's the house going to look like? I mean, it's pretty amazing when you think about it. And oh, by the way, it's kind of interesting that Ellen White talked about this. She talked about daydreaming. And this is in Message to Young People, that we should daydream, you know, like these romance novels and all that kind of stuff. But she does say, let your imagination dwell on heaven, because it's going to be better than you've ever thought. As, what is it, 1 Corinthians 2 verse 9, that says, I have not seen nor ear heard, neither entered in the heart of man the things of God's prepared for those who love him. So our primary thing here is to get by, you know, with being debt-free and our needs met and our family met and our children educated and our house paid off. But as much as we can, let's get the work finished. That's the point. Okay. Now we're going to go into this one. And this is retirement. You guys have Sonics around here? This lady is in retirement age, but she's working at Sonics. When you go to Walmart, sometimes, or some of the Sam's or some of these other places, there's a senior citizen meeting you there. Why is that person there? Well, not just because they love people. A lot of them really do love people. They're very nice people. But they're supplementing their Social Security. That's what they're there for. They're wanting to make a little extra money so they can, you know, enjoy some things. And I'll show you some interesting stuff about that. But this lady is on skates, and she's skating around at Sonics, helping people. This little boy's laughing, and he thinks it's kind of cute. Will you ever be able to retire? By the way, if you notice, you can't see it, but I can see it because I'm real close to it. This was Time Magazine, July 29, 2002, back in the good old days. I will tell you also that during 2008 to 11, in the economic crisis, people my age, on the leading edge of the baby boomers who were thinking about retirement, lost thousands and thousands of dollars from their investment portfolios and are having to work many years longer just to be able to retire. You believe I'm telling you the truth about this? Absolutely true. So I'm going to show you something interesting here. The stages of life are interesting. Laying a foundation, which typically runs into the 40s, accumulating your assets, your 40s and 50s, preserving your assets, your 60s and the 70s, and then distributing your assets. So I'm going to show it to you in a better way. This is the way I would do it. The other one would be just from the civics book. The learning years, birth to age 30, that's when you're getting your education. It's the best time to do it because you have fewer responsibilities in life. Birth to age 30. The earning years are 30 to age 60. Now, this is kind of interesting because it is this time when you're paying off your student loans if you have any, you're buying your cars, you're buying your house, you're educating your children. By the way, this is the most stressful part of life. Most divorces occur during this time because it is extremely stressful to get through this life. But if you have a good education, remember, if you start out with the education proper, then the earning years are better and you're debt-free the returning years. So I asked somebody during the break, young person, in my position right now, since my house is paid for, my cars are paid for, and I don't have any student loans anymore, and my kids are educated and so on, independent, should I be giving more to the cause of God now than ever? What do you think? Sure. So much so, I told you that Kathy's the money manager of our family. She is all year long except for about 2 weeks in February. And after our W-2 forms come in, she says, you're the attorney, you do the taxes. So she gives it to me. And at that point, I can see all of her good bookkeeping and all of that stuff. And I don't cheat, but I actually use TurboTax. That's as cheap as I get. And so it'll print out all the forms and everything. So when I get to Schedule AB, where it fills your itemized deductions, I take out my contributions. And when I did it in TurboTax this last year, a little red light started flashing, and a little beep went off and says, "Are you sure? Are you sure? Are you sure?" I mean, this could not be right. It's way out of whack with the president and the vice president. You understand? Do you guys understand what they gave last year? The vice president gave less than 1% of his income to charity of any kind. So that's why when somebody gives 20% or more, it's way out of whack with the average person. So I have to override it to enter it in. I'll tell you an interesting thing happened to me years ago. It would never happen again, but it did happen to me. By the way, if you get a call from the IRS and they want to do an audit on your finances and your taxes, this is something I will tell you should always do. Ask on the phone, when the first interview on the phone, what is the nature of your request? And they will say something, well, we want to check out your contributions. And so if you go to the IRS in a personal interview, what do you take there? Only your contributions. You don't take your whole schedule, 1040, nothing like that. Just your contributions and the receipts that you have. So this guy called me and he says, we'd like to invite you to come to Dalton, Georgia. We were living in Calvin at that time, the conference office in Georgia Common Conference. And he said, the nature of it is we'd like to check out your contributions. And he said to me, do you actually have receipts for all these contributions? I said, oh yeah. I said, I'm a Seventh-day Adventist minister, and I really believe it. I'm not doing this just because to keep my job. I wish I could do more. And you have receipts for everything? I said, yeah. Well, you don't have to come in then. He actually told me that. It's the only time I've had to go in twice since then, but both times the guy wouldn't say that to me. So you have to show it. Oh, by the way, many of you know that if you put $20 as a $20 bill in the offering plate, can you count it on your income tax? No. Used to you could say, well, I estimate I get $20 in cash, but now you have to have a receipt for everything. So if you want tax receipt, you should put it in an envelope and mark it for what you want it to go for. Very, very simple. Okay. Some people have said to me in the past, well, I'm not tithing and giving my offerings for income tax purposes. I'm doing this because I love God. Well, Jesus said, I want you to be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. If the government will give you a deduction, you should take it. That's what I believe. That's for your benefit. Okay. We'll go on here. Oh, by the way, after the earning years comes the returning years. Why do I call it the returning years? This is weird. Because whether you're a Christian or not, when you die, you're not taking anything with you. You start needing making plans of what you're going to do with it. By the way, we'll just tell you that everybody in this room has a will. Whether you've made one for yourself or whether the state has made it for you. Is it true? Now listen carefully. If you do not have a will that you have made, the state makes one for you, but the state assumes that you are an atheist. Is this true? Because in no case would any of your assets go to a church or charity when you die. Only goes to relatives, whether you like them or not, whether you need it or not, that's where it's going. So if you want to have a Christian will, it's one you make yourself. We'll look at that in just a minute. Okay, so that's what we call it the returning years. So we're going to talk about retirement just a little bit here. Important reasons to plan for retirement: to be able to work part-time or full-time for others, support God's cause with resources, maybe you go on mission trips and so on, to minimize stress during your later years. That's why you make a plan. So there's a longer retirement plan or retirement time predicted. By the way, when Social Security first went into effect, the average lifespan of Americans was much lower than it is today. Retirees today will likely have 16 to 20 years in retirement, and this covers the time from cessation of work to the end of life. Early 1900s, the average age of death was 47 years. Today, people live well into their 70s, 80s. Even Adventists live into their 90s, sometimes up to 100. So this is pretty interesting. The longer retirees live, the more difficult it will be for the federal government to continue paying Social Security. So I'm going to ask you this question. How many of you have heard that the Social Security system is about to go bankrupt? Anybody ever heard that? How many of you heard that, well, we've got plenty of money, it should last until 2044? Have you ever heard that? Which are true? Both are true. This is interesting because I've been paying into Social Security since I was 14. And I was working in the cabinet. Do you understand? And we've paid into it for years and years and years. I don't think of this as an entitlement program. I think of this as the retirement program that the government designed. You put into it, we'll add to it, and give you interest and so on, and then you'll have some money coming when you retire. Does that make sense? So we've been paying into this all these years. The real interesting part is the government has this great big huge vault where they put all the Social Security trust money into it, but instead of keeping it there for you with your name on your account, they have loaned it out to other government agencies, and it's filled now with IOUs to the other departments. Do you understand? This was not my fault. It was not your fault. We should not have to recapitalize it again. But the problem is, the people we sent to Washington, think about it, have just borrowed another $1 trillion. And, you know, your business, your family could not run that way. It's very interesting. Welcome to the end time. That's what I'll tell you. Something's going to implode. It just can't continue this way. So we're going to go on here. Oh, by the way, if you're receiving Social Security at this point, I would not worry a minute over it. Because God's going to take care of you if you've been faithful, right? In addition, I think the Social Security will probably last until it's time for the ravens to feed us. The government can make money, of course, print it and use it that way. The point is, things are not going to go up as they have been for years and years and years. They may raise my minimum retirement age was 66. They may raise it up to 72. Whoever knows, because people are living longer. And that would have a lot. In 1960, Social Security issued 2,000 checks for Americans aged 100. And here's the check. By the way, it's interesting. If you're drawing Social Security now, it's very likely you're not getting a check in the mail. Right? What's happened? Electronic transfer into your bank. But by 2010, there were 100,000 monthly payments going to centenarians, to people over 100 years old in America. So you understand, we're living longer. This is pretty interesting because the U.S. Public Health Service and others have worked together to make people more healthy in America. Like most any city, you go to a motel and you live, to stay overnight, you can just put a cup under the faucet and drink the water, straight out of it. There's places in the earth where you'd get deathly sick if you did that. But in America, we have, you know, these health things. We have done the immunization programs to where very seldom now do we ever hear anybody with communicable diseases. I remember as a young boy going down the street in my block in Ashland, Oregon, and seeing a ribbon around the house that said quarantine. You can't go in there. This guy's got something you could get. But now we've done away with most of these communicable diseases. What kind of diseases are we fighting now? They're called chronic diseases or lifestyle diseases we bring on ourselves. Cancer, diabetes, heart disease. You understand those kinds of things. That I can't get heart disease from you nor you from me unless you live like I do. You see what I'm saying? But it's an individual situation. But the whole point I'm going to make is because people are living longer, now by 2010, 100,000 checks a month go to people 100 years or more. The reason are preventing lifestyle, of course, wide dissemination of information, promoting healthy lifestyle. Some of you remember Jim Ryan, the first guy I think to run was an under a 4-minute mile guy from Kansas. This is very, very interesting because Jim's father used to have to follow him down the roads in Kansas in an old Ford pickup with a shotgun to keep hecklers from hurting his boy. Now it's common to see people running, walking, exercising. Most every city in America has exercise trails you can go to because we understand the value of exercise. Do you understand? We're doing it more, not as much as we should, but we are doing it more. And also people understand the values of drugs, vaccines, and so on. Preparation. Each stage of life, I've talked about this to you already. The first stage is completing your education, planning for your family and your career. The second one is raising and educating your children. Home and other major purchases are made. It's the most intense time financially, as I mentioned, and marriages typically break up. But the third stage of life can be enjoyable if properly planned for. Your home is paid off, your transportation needs are met, no lingering debts, sufficient income to meet your family's needs. Those are the important things. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to get into a couple of other topics. But let's just look at this one. This is what's the anticipated sources of income. It's not in your book. 27% from Social Security. This is more an ideal thing. Savings, part-time work, home equity, IRA, pension, spouse's pension, 401k, and other. Are you aware that there are some people retired in America that their only income is Social Security? And that means that they're not going to be traveling, they're not going to go on a cruise, they're not going to be helping their kids very much. They're not, you understand, they're going to drive the old car till it falls apart, those kind of things. So you just have to understand. When planning for retirement, first list your income sources and then develop your retirement budget to be able to live within your income. Because in retirement, this is one time in your life when you cannot afford to go into debt. That's the interesting thing. So I found this little statement that you see on the screen is another pyramid, but it has nothing to do with the Illuminati or aliens. It's just an illustration. So you just see it. There's 3 things you think about when you get to retirement age and you start doing your estate plan. Let me just tell you, even if you have a will, a valid will, it does not necessarily mean that your stuff is going where you wanted it to go. Why would I say that? It's probably better than not having one. But somebody may contest your will. I'll give you an illustration. Leona Helmsley, who was the hotel heiress who lived in New York City, when she died a few years ago, she left $12 million to her dog, her pet dog. You remember reading that in the papers. It's very, very incredible. So, I mean, how could a poodle ever spend $12 million? Well, of course, she was, part of that was somebody watched the dog and so on. But anyway, just a year or 2 later, a federal judge overturned the will and gave only $1 million to the poor dog and left $11 million to go to another charity, which was a university. So it was overturned even though it was a valid will. This is interesting. Okay, so what we're going to look at here is the 3 things you think about. First of all is financial independence. Your personal needs are cared for. You have income that you know you can count on during your retirement years. That's the first thing to think about. The next one is family legacy. And that means that family members are taken care of, and you can understand that anybody who has needs that depends on you. By the way, I'll just tell you, what does the average person do if they make a will? They give all their money to their grown kids, whether they need it or not. Is this true? But what you think about, first of all, is to think about giving them an education so they can become independent adults. I remember when we moved to Washington, D.C., Andrew was helping us load the van, and it's a big moving van. And one of our file cabinets, the drawer came out. Fortunately, it didn't spill over, but it said last will and testament. We already talked about this in worship. We had asked our kids, would you rather have your retirement when you're young and when you need it, or whether we're old, like I'm going to be 95, and you're like 20 years younger than me, so you're, what, 75. Would you rather have it then or when you're younger? Guess what they chose? Younger. So fortunately, Andrew and Melissa, 3 years apart, we gave them each a cash amount when they finished college. This is their primary inheritance. Andrew used his to pay for law school. Very interesting if you think about this now, what I'm going to tell you. And I'm just going to show you this financial independence. Instead of us helping our kids through their adult life, we should educate them so much they can help us when we need help. Does that make sense? That's what we're talking about here. Not a big deal. But the family legacy, is there anybody in your family that is afflicted or whatever, that couldn't support themselves? Those are people who need to take care of. And finally, your spiritual legacy, what you return to God. Those are things to think about. So we're going to look at the security of Social Security designed to supplement other retirement income. Amounts for about 50% or more of total income, retirement income for many families in America. But it's insufficient to make house payments or pay off credit cards. So you want to make sure you're out of debt. Currently, the Social Security system covers 97% of American workers. 47% of Americans over age 65 would be living in poverty if they had no Social Security. So this is very important to understand. We're going to go on. Did I have that right there? No. I wanted to tell you this. In 1945, 45 people were working and contributing to the Social Security Trust Fund for every one person that was drawing on retirement benefits. But by 1995, there were only 3 people working for every one drawing benefits. A significant drop. Not 45 people, but only 3 people for every person drawing from the system. So you can reach your full retirement age if it's 66. That is if you're born between 43 and 54. The earliest you can retire is age 62. Why would there be a problem of retiring at age 62? Anybody know? The primary reason that I could think of is that health insurance does not come in, that is Medicare, until age 65, right? So if we retire at age 62, you're going to have to make sure that you have health insurance during that time. By the way, if you do the math, it's very interesting that if you take early retirement, let's just say you retired at 62 instead of 66 and started drawing, it would take 18 years for you to reach parity. That is, you would have the same amount drawn from Social Security if you waited or if you got it early. So it depends on how long you think you're going to live. probably be a good idea to take it early, except the health insurance thing. Or you may want to work it to build it up more so you have a different amount come in. But if you take early retirement, notice the bottom there, when the full retirement age is 66, the monthly benefit would be cut by how much? 25%. So if you're entitled to $1,000 a month, how much would you get? $750, and that would be for the rest of your life. You're cutting it that much out. So let's just look at it this way. I want to talk to you briefly about an annuity, and we're also going to talk about reverse mortgages. Because you have these really, really intelligent-looking people, some of whom have been United States senators, they've even played an attorney on television, saying you need a reverse mortgage. And I'm talking to you about, who's this guy? From Tennessee, Fred Thompson. Okay. In the commercial market, an annuity is an insurance product that's designed to provide you with an income for life. The insurance company guarantees that the periodic payments will be a guaranteed amount per dollar in your account. But variable annuities are securities, and they're regulated by the SEC. This means the income of variable annuities is subject to market fluctuation and investment risk and possible loss of principal. Now, this doesn't mean that the amount you get each month may be different, but it means that the amount you have in the account will be less than you anticipated, and you might actually end up without being able to get payments at some point. Variable annuities are not recommended since the purpose for an annuity is in the context of retirement is to guarantee fixed income for life. Now, I want to tell you something about this idea of annuity. There are many wise financial counselors that are now saying you should annuitize the difference between what you have coming in that you know is going to come in and what you actually need. So you need to do a financial budget for your retirement. And you predict, well, I'm going to get $3,000 for my retirement benefits from Social Security and other sources. But I'd really like to have $3,500. How could you get $500 more? I've already told you one of the methods. Work at Walmart. What else? Do an annuity. If you do an annuity for a certain amount, say $100,000, for a typical retirement age, you can bring in $500 a month for the rest of your life. This would be a charitable gift annuity because the balancing account once you pass away, or the second to die if you're a joint and survivor type, would go to the charity that you choose. But it's a kind of a win-win situation. You'd like to say, well, I'd like to see it flourish, but I may need this money during my retirement. But when I don't need it anymore, it's going to the cause of God. That's pretty simple. By the way, Ellen White recommended the charitable gift annuity. We have in her counsel 2 statements. She didn't call it that because she didn't know his name, but she mentioned the very same thing that it does. So we're going to look at this one now. 2 important goals for Christian retired couples: to have a guaranteed income for life that will provide for the family and their needs, and to have a plan to return any unneeded assets to God during life or upon the death of the survivor. So we're going to talk about just briefly the gift annuity. Then we'll look at reverse mortgages. A gift annuity is a contract under which a charity, in return for a transfer of cash or marketable securities or other assets, agrees to pay a fixed amount of money to 1 or 2 individuals for their lifetime. Now let me just tell you that if you did gift annuity with Adventist World Radio, for example, you have the full faith and credit of the whole Adventist Church behind you. So even if you live to be 130 and all of your assets were gone, the church has a guarantee that you're going to have that income as long as you live. So even if all of your assets are used up, they'll have to dip into their reserves to make sure you get your money. Does everybody understand that? That's the value of gift annuity. We're going to go on here. Here's Ellen White's statement. There are those among us who have a surplus in needs, but they think they need it to sustain themselves. Remember, Ellen White doesn't underline, I'm just underlining it for you. Let matters be arranged that these persons shall have interest on their money as long as they shall live, and let them donate the principal to the cause and work of God. Thus they will return to the Lord that which is his own. That's a Christian situation, you understand. So how do you generate funds for annuity? Downsize your home, use the equity beyond what a smaller new home would cost. Use the cash equivalent or cash value of the life insurance you might have. Use a portion of savings or funds in a 401k, 403b, or IRA to fund an annuity. Or use funds from job-related buyout to sell accumulated assets. So if you could generate $100,000, as I mentioned, you could probably add $500 a month. We'll go on. What about reverse mortgages? They are touted a lot today. I have about 7 articles in my file from all kinds of news magazines, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes magazine, Money magazine, and so on. Every one of them are negative toward reverse mortgages. You see these testimonials of people that say, if I had known this was going to happen, I would have never done it. So we're going to go on and look at some of these. Reverse mortgage is another way to supplement income during retirement. The lender gives the homeowner money in exchange for a mortgage interest against their home. The loan allows the homeowner to convert, listen carefully, a portion of their home's equity into cash, typically not more than 50%. What does that mean about the other 50%? It's tied up and you can never access it. That's important to know, because they want to make sure they have that background there. Money can come either in a lump sum and monthly payments for as long as the homeowner lives in the residence. That's not as long as you live, but as long as you live in the house. The larger monthly payments, of course, for a set period of time, or in some combination of these. Here's the HUD requirements. Housing and Urban Development, federal government requirements. The borrower and spouse must be 62 years or older. They must own their own home outright or have a low enough mortgage balance that they can pay it off at the closing with proceeds from the reverse loan. They must live in the house as their primary residence. They must be able to pay taxes, insurance, maintenance on the house, as if it were still theirs. And the fifth one is so interesting. Reverse mortgages are so tricky that they have to receive counseling from an approved source before they can get the loan. Pretty interesting. Some of the advantages, it frees up some of the home's equity. The owner can remain in the residence. By the way, let me just tell you something. As we get older, we keep thinking about things in our house. And I want to tell you this about me. I have had an automobile since I was age 16. I've never been without a car. The day somebody takes my car keys away, it's going to be a bad day for that person. Do you understand what I'm telling you? I don't believe that. I'm going to have, somebody's got to coax me out of it somehow. I'm just going to tell you that. You have to think ahead. If you, well, I'll just give you this. If time should last 20 years from now, I don't think it will, but if time lasted for 20 years, I'm not going to be going around doing seminars. I'm going to be in an assisted living center watching 380 Do you understand? You just have to know you're not going to live forever in the present state until Jesus comes and we get the immortal bodies, like in his glorious bodies, we're told. The interesting part about all of this is you plan for the future. By the way, if you're a senior person contemplating living in a retirement center or something like that, if you choose it yourself, great. If you don't, somebody else will choose it for you. It's going to go like that, whether you like it or not. Pretty simple. But then the owner can remain in the residence. The reason I mention all this is this. Somebody says, well, I think I'll get a reverse mortgage and I can live in my house longer. But they're just thinking they're going to live in the house longer. Typically, after they get it, they have to move out somewhere with one of their kids or something. Then the mortgage becomes due. But here's the problem with that. Here it is, disadvantages. High closing costs up to 10%. This is very, very interesting. So let's just say it costs $10,000 at closing to get your reverse mortgage. You don't have the money, so where do you get it? They put it against your loan. So that means that already if you decided the next day you were going to pay it off, you'd owe that $10,000. Very interesting. It ties up the balance of the equity in your house, and you still have to pay tax and insurance to maintain the property. So that's the big problem. And I would not recommend it for most people. That's the bottom line. So we're going to go on here. You know that you're ready for retirement if you have these three prerequisites. First of all, you're debt-free, including the home mortgage. Second one, you have enough income to provide for life's necessities. And the third one is you have health insurance. Is health insurance important today? Why do you think it is? Because it costs so much. So I'm going to give you an illustration. I had a plantar wart on my index finger. So I went to my dermatologist, who was a very nice Chinese lady, a young woman, and I said, I've got this wart. I told you I go to the internet in order to figure out what it was. So I said, I would like for you to remove this thing. It couldn't be that big of a deal. Oh, no, she said, I can't do that. You'll have to go to a surgeon to do that. So I went to the surgeon that she recommended, and he said, oh, that's sure enough, that's what you got. Well, in order for us to do surgery, you have to go to your primary care physician and get it okay to get surgery. So here I'm at the third doctor already. You guys following along here? Then I go back to the surgeon after getting the clearance of my physical and so on, and I was okay for me to have surgery. This is my index finger. And the doctor says, when I'm back there, this is your anesthesiologist. I said, my what? This is my finger. In fact, Kathy had driven me over there. She came over with me and she was going to drive back. They went out to the lobby and said, Mrs. Reid here. So she came up, would you like to see your husband before he goes under the anesthetic? I'm getting a surgery for my finger. Next thing I know, somebody's helping me put my pants back on. It's incredible. The most amazing thing is I had a planter board, and it cost me $2,500 to get it taken off. You get the point? It's expensive. So I probably should have lived with it forever, but that's why you got to have a healthy church. So now we're going to talk about retirement in the Bible. You know what the Bible says about retirement? This is the only question I ask, and everybody gets it right, because no one says anything, and that's exactly what the Bible says. Nothing. Okay. Except 2 places in the Bible. One of them is Numbers 8:25, where it says the high priest could no longer go into the most holy place on the Day of Atonement. After what age? After age 50. He could still do other priestly duties, but not that one. Does anybody know why? Well, of course, that would be an old man in those days. But the interesting part about it, if the high priest had any sins in his life, he goes in there, pedophile or something, he'll drop that. Praise God, right? Or if there was any sins in the camp that were known to everybody, he hadn't taken care of that, he dropped that. And the third reason is he could just have a heart attack and die. So they're eliminating that by just saying, you can't do this job after age 50. You can still be a priest. That's the only time retirement is talked about in the whole New Testament. In the New Testament, Luke the 12th chapter, a real interesting one. This is the story of the, believe it or not, the rich fool. So we turn to our Bibles. I want to show you a story here that Jesus is talking about. Very, very interesting. This is Luke the 12th chapter. And we'll go through it real quickly. Did I say Luke? Okay. Usually when I speak, I have a marker in my Bible, so it just falls over to that place. But here we're going to look at it. Jesus is talking here, and he's giving them the parable. A certain rich man, this is the parable of the rich fool. Jesus is talking about something completely different. And then verse 13, this is Luke 12:13. A man from the crowd said, Teacher, tell my brother to divide the inheritance with me. But he said, Man, who made me a judge or arbiter over you? Take him to beware of covetous, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of the things he possesses. So I'm going to ask you, do you think people today argue about inheritances? This is incredible. I'll just tell you one experience that I had. I was working in the Georgia Cumberland Conference Office, which is right on I-75 in Calhoun, Georgia. Many of you have seen it going by a colonial building, a real nice building. I was in there, in my office one day, and the receptionist called me and says, Elder Reid, could you come quickly? And I knew right away that I didn't have to ask her what it was. I needed to get out to the lobby. So I get out to the lobby, and there's this guy that is really drunk there. And he wasn't fighting with me, he was just really drunk. He was having to hold on to things, and she thought I was going to vomit all over her desk. So anyway, I said, could I help you, sir? And he said, I've come here to see Ed Reid. And I said, well, I'm Ed Reid, why don't you come to my office? So he had to literally hold on to it like I'm taking him to a banquet. You know, he's holding on to my arm, going down to my office, and all the secretaries were sticking their head out, looking down the window, me taking this guy down to my office. So when you're lubricated, you really tell the truth a lot. So he told me this amazing story. He said, my father was nearly about to die. He had a terminal illness. So he called his attorney, and he drafted a will and signed it. And he said, I'm going to ask my friend so-and-so to be the executor of the estate. And he wrote it in his will, knowing that my children will argue about the money. It's not a big estate, it's only $60,000 for 6 kids, they're each going to get $10,000 about. But anyway, the guy died. Everybody here probably already thought ahead, but guess what happened? The executor died before the guy did. He's the old guy, one of his cronies, see, he died too. So the mother had a life estate in the property, and she could live there till she died. And then when she passed away, there was no executor. So all 6 kids, I call them kids, they're grown people in their 60s, you understand. They're going down to the probate office, and they said, Judge, we've got a big problem. And the big problem is, our father and mother both passed away. We've been told we can inherit the property, but we don't have an executor to do the work. And the judge says, well, that's no problem. Which one of you is the oldest? And this little guy raised his hand. He says, you are the executor. Banged his gavel down the next case. He didn't realize he just started World War III. And this is incredible. These people argued for years about it, thinking the older brother, if he hired an appraiser or an attorney or a real estate or he's getting some money under the table. You understand? I don't know why people think that unless they would have done it themselves. But nonetheless, They decided we're going to have to get this settled. So they went out to the old home place. This guy that's telling me this, first person, he said, we got out there. We weren't there but about 15 minutes, and we realized we're going to get into a big fight. And he said, my older brother, we all think he's going to take advantage of us. So he said, I went to my car. I'm a carpenter. And I opened up my toolbox right behind the cab and pulled out a big crowbar, a steel bar that has a hook on the end, you pull nails with it. And I started chasing my older brother around the house. Now you understand that one hit that could kill him. This is over $10,000. This is incredible. He says, you know, when you get older, you think you're still a spry jar when you're a kid. But my older brother, after about 3 laps around the house, realized he wasn't going to be able to keep this up very long. So he ran and jumped in his new car and closed the door and locked it. No problem, I had the crowbar. So he smashed the front window of his brother's brand new car. And it's in safety glass, so it broke into a million pieces. It went all over the dash, all over the floor, all over his brother. At which time the others tackled him. They had one sister and their 5 boys. The other guys tackled him, and the sister called the sheriff, and they came out and arrested him. So he went to jail. Nobody would pay his bill. You know, typically they get real sorry for their friend and their relative and go down and pay bail. This guy's telling me this. And he said, I sat in jail for 2 weeks. Then one of my friends, who's also a builder, paid my way out. And I was so happy to get out, I got drunk, and now I came to see you. Isn't that incredible? This actually happened. Strange stuff happens. The bottom line is people argue about inheritances. The best thing to do is to give the inheritance early and to do the rest to advance the cause of God, and then nobody argues about it. You see what I'm saying? We're going to look at some of these. Ellen White doesn't say a lot about retirement either, but the common fears of older people are pretty simple, we're told. I'll show you what they are. They think of dying too soon, living too long, having catastrophic illness, all the resources can go at one time, or mental or physical disability. Who's going to take care of me when I get older? Now, that's the interesting part. Notice this interesting. Insurance companies make fortunes on these fears. People voluntarily give insurance companies billions of dollars annually to take away these fears. But when commenting on these common fears of older persons, in 1 Thessalonians 4:23, Ellen White gives this counsel. All of these fears originate with Satan. The devil wants you to think the worst thing's going to happen, so you can't use your money to advance the cause of God. Pretty interesting. So you plan ahead. And what do? Financial problems ahead, we have the debt load of the government. It's just gone up to $18 trillion. Very interesting. The welfare burden. Most of you are probably aware, Social Security system we've already talked about. The graying of America. Remember I told you, somebody told me earlier when they saw a picture on the van, you used to be a handsome man. Now I'm an old gray-headed guy. So the thing I'm going to tell you is America is graying. Are you aware of what I'm going to tell you right now? It's amazing. Since 2011, there have been 10,000 Americans reaching their full retirement age. How often? Every day of the week. And that's going to last for about 10 years. Now, this is incredible because we are the baby boom generation, which means the people that were conceived after World War II. This is an amazing statistic. So the graying of America, that's pretty interesting. And this is the 1/3 of a nation thing. We would be losing people in America as far as population is concerned if it were not for immigration, legal or illegal. Is this true? It's absolutely true. But the bottom line is that many of the people who come to America now do not have an adequate education, so they're working at minimum wage. Those are the people that are paying into Social Security now. This is the interesting part about it. 1/3 of the nation. Then I'm going to show you abortion and declining birth rate. Most of you know, in 1973, there's a U.S. Supreme Court case called Roe versus Wade, which essentially allowed abortion on demand. Since that time, since 1973, 50 million American fetuses have been aborted intentionally. Most of them, more than 90%, normal, healthy women who carry normal, healthy fetuses. Does everybody understand? We have essentially sacrificed an entire generation of people that will not be around to support us when we're older and to pay into the system. Very, very interesting. Common things. Some points to consider. The first prerequisite, I will tell you, what would you say? This is a retirement concept again. What's the only string on my guitar? Get out of debt. How to prepare for retirement. Have health and health care. And by the way, let me just tell you this, something interesting. I was at Camp June, Alaska for the camp meeting a few years ago. I was there 2 years ago as well, but this happened the one time before, 2 years before that. A lady came to me and she said, I saw this ad in the paper of some kind of a vegetarian cooking school. And I just thought, you know, if I could be a little more vegetarian, I'd probably live longer and be healthier and so on. So she's not an Adventist. She went to the Adventist church and she attended a vegetarian cooking school, which is great. She said, now I learn about Adventists living longer and I'm just, you know, excited about it. I feel better and all that. Now I come to camp meeting, you tell me how to manage my money. What else do you guys know? It's amazing stuff. So what I'm telling you is this. If we practiced what we know in the Bible about money management, we would be known in the world for our expertise in money management. Is this true? Just like we would be known in the world for our health zones and so on. You know there's 3 blue zones in America, in the world. One of them is Loma Linda, where people typically live up to 100 years of age. It's been in National Geographic. I mean, this is incredible. Some of the national news magazines. Another one is taper off, don't quit. And the real bottom line is, when you retire, do something like I'm doing. Kathy and I are working half-time for Adventist World Radio. The reason is not so much that we need the money, but we want to keep our minds going good. You understand? It's a way to be active and to use the talents that God has given us to help advance His cause. That kind of thing. Don't quit. By the way, people rust out faster than they wear out. Very interesting. Also, more than one source of income. You want to minimize expenses, the size and location of the house, climate and cost of living. I'll just give you the tax considerations, property and real estate. I am not a nosy person. But I knew this man who was retiring at the General Conference. And of course, typically people get to the General Conference after the halfway point of their life. And if they work there and they do good work, they may stay till retirement time. But when you retire at the General Conference, there is a written policy. Your department cannot give you a badge. You understand what I mean by that? No big flame. So what you do is you can use the little atrium at the General Conference between 12 o'clock and 1 o'clock, and you can have people come by and sign your little book or whatever and tell you how much they love you. But all the stuff, there's no presents, nothing like that. All you can do is have some kind of drink, like apple juice and a cookie. And that's pretty much it. Or maybe some mixed nuts. So this guy's retired. And I went over to him, and I said, well, I understand you're retired. We're going to miss you around here. I said, where are you moving to? Because I thought anybody who was thinking like me, the minute they can get away from the noise and pollution and the traffic in Washington, D.C. is going to be gone. But he says, well, we're staying right in this area. So he says, our house is paid for. Good move, right? And so on. And we have children and family in the area. We're just going to stay here. I said, do you mind if I ask you a personal question? Well, go ahead. We're friends. You know, we've known each other for a long time. I said, how much are you paying for your home taxes here? Very, very interesting. About $12,000 a year for a postage stamp lot in Tacoma Park. $1,000 a month to live there. I said, are you aware that you could come to Tennessee or North Carolina and do the same thing for about $1,000? Is it true? Save yourself $11,000 a year. So that's what I'm telling you about. Move to a place where the taxes are lower, and that's going to be to your advantage. Okay, we'll go on. Inheritance and estate planning. This is the last thing that I'll present to you. You guys, should we crash right now, or should we do about 20 minutes more? I can give you a little bit more, and this will be valuable for you, okay? If you need to leave, you can. But I also want to give you the time for some questions in just a minute. Remember that your estate plan is the crowning act of your stewardship. It actually says in it what you plan to do with what God has given you. What happens if you die without a will? This is where you die intestate. You know, without a plan, the state will make one for you. The common practice, of course, is giving it to kids. We're going to look at the Christian will as doing different. Ellen White stated, I was shown the awful fact that Satan and his angels have more to do with the management of the property of God's professed people than the Lord has. Stewards of the last days are unwise. So we're going to look at some of these. If you die without a will, the state assumes, these are my words, that you're an atheist because in no case will any of your assets return to God through a church or charity. Really, we all have wills, either one we've made or one the state makes for you, and it's the crowning act of your stewardship. So what kind would you have? Let's look at it. This is Ecclesiastes 12:21. There's a man whose labor is with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, yet he must leave his heritage to a man who has not labored for it. This also is vanity and what? Great evil. This is Ecclesiastes written by Solomon. Very interesting. So we're going to look at the new and different will that Ellen White suggested. Your wife and children, of course, should not be left destitute. Provision should be made for them if they are needy. But do not simply, because it is customary, bring into your will a long line of relatives who are not needy. Let it ever be kept in mind that the present selfish system of disposing of property is not God's plan, but man's device. So I'm going to tell you, very, very interesting, there's a statement, and I think I may have it here a little bit later, Volume 3 of the Testimonies and one in Volume 4 of the Testimony, where there's whole chapters on Christian estate planning. Christians should be reformers and break up the present system, giving an entirely new aspect to the formation of wills. Now here's the deal. That which many propose to defer until they're about to die, if they were Christians indeed, they would do while they have a strong hold on life. Now I'm going to tell you something about this before we go further. Ellen White had only 3 years of formal education. I have master's degrees in theology or master of divinity, one from Loma Linda in the health area, and a doctor of law degree. Everything I know anything about, when Ellen White writes on it, she knows the truth about it. Is that incredible or not? So there's a thing called testamentary capacity. We call that in the law. Do you think it is possible for a person to be alive but they could not make a will? Not that they didn't know how, but they didn't know who their friends are. They don't know who their family is, they don't know what their assets are. Could you be alive and not have testamentary capacity? Obvious. So when should you do it? When you have your wits about it. She talks about it here. While they have a strong hold on life, they should devote themselves and their property to God. And while acting as his stewards, they would have the satisfaction of doing their duty. By becoming their own executors, they could meet the claims of God themselves, instead of shifting responsibility upon others. Now, how could you become your own executor? An executor only comes into play after you die, right? How could you become your own executor? Do it yourself. Do the best you can to give it away, and then what you haven't been able to give away because you need to live on it, that way you do in your will. Pretty interesting. So we'll go on. Those who hold fast their property until the last moment surrender to death rather than to the cause. Losses are occurring continually. Banks fail. Prosperity is consumed in very many ways. Property. Satan works to prevent the means from coming into the treasury at all. To the age who are losing their hold of this life, I appeal to you to make a right disposition of the Lord's good before you fall asleep in Jesus. Remember that you are God's stewards. Do not fail attending to this while you have your reason. Here again is testamentary capacity. As age comes upon us, it is our duty to make a disposition of our means to the instrumentalities that God has established. The Lord would have his followers dispense their means while they can do it themselves. Some may inquire, must we actually dispossess ourselves of everything in which we call our own? We may not be required, she says, to do this now, but we must be willing to do so for Christ's sake. So here's the story. Ellen White would give strong sermons on stewardship. She would even give a sermon on stewardship at camp meeting. People would walk down the aisle and say, with tears streaming down their cheeks, should we sell our property or our farm and give the money to the cause? You know what she would say? She would always say the same answer. If you have multiple properties and lands, sell what you don't need to put the money in the cause. But if you need a place to stay, keep that property, but lay it on the altar and God will give you the time when to do it. Does that make sense? That's what she would always say. Very interesting. We must acknowledge that our possessions are actually by using them really whenever we need to advance this cause. There are aged ones among us who are during the close of their probation. What does that mean? About to die. But for the one of wide awake men to secure the cause of God, the means in their possession passed in the hands of those who are serving Satan. This means was only lent them of God to be returned to him, but in 9 cases out of 10, these brethren, when passing from the stage of action, appropriate God's property in a way that cannot glorify him, for not $1 will ever flow into the Lord's treasury. Very, very interesting. Here's another guy about to die. Here's a man with God's money or property in his hands. He's about to change his stewardship. He's about to die. Will he place the means which God has lent him to be used in his cause in the hands of wicked men just because they're his relatives? Should not the Christian men feel interested and anxious for that man's future good, as well as for the interest of God's cause, that he shall make a right disposition of his Lord's money? The talents lent him for wise improvement. So this is very interesting. I'm going to give you now a personal testimony. My mother called me. She was about 73. My dad was 75. And she's the only person in the world that called me Eddie. So to her, I'm still a low boy. And she says, Eddie, your father and I have decided to make our will. Some people think if they make their will, they're going to die the next day. You do not die any sooner. You just die. What's the next word? Prepare. Without leaving your family in a lurch. So she says, your father and I are about to make our wills, but we just have a question. How many brothers do I have? Anybody remember? 4 boys in our family, so there's 3 brothers. And at that time, 2 of our brothers, my brothers, were outside of church, living way away from God. So Mother said to us, we're afraid that if we give the money to those 2 guys, that they'll misuse it, maybe use it on drugs or alcohol or whatever. We know that you 2 will use it wisely, we just don't know what to do. So I didn't say, well, Mother, give it all to me and I'll make sure to use it wisely. I didn't tell her. What I said was, I've been studying this topic myself. 4th volume of Testimonies, page 476 and following, talking about what to do. And so I said, I'll tell you what you should do. This is what I think you should do. We're all grown men. We have sufficient income to take care of ourselves. We don't need your money. I think you should treat us all 4 exactly alike. I think you should give us each $500 to make a plane ticket to your funeral and give the whole rest of it back to God. And Mother started weeping on the phone. And she said, Eddie, that's what I was hoping you would say. Isn't that incredible? So, very few people who've ever lived will be able to say what I'm going to tell you now. As an attorney, my mother said, would you make our wills for us? I drafted my own parents' wills where they were living in California. So my father's already passed away. If Mother passes away before Jesus comes, she's 91, I think now, not in good health, I'll get $100 or $500 to fly to her funeral, and that's it. So here's the story. That's a Christian will, by the way, isn't it? Mother said, well, what's the problem? They brought our family into the church, and I wanted to give some to them, and we're building a new church where we live, and we want to help with the building program, and all those kinds of things. And this just gives me a tremendous relief to say what you said. To help advance the cause of God as much as you can. Remember us tokenly all the way. So that's what we did. So I want to tell you about my own will. This is pretty interesting. This is personal stuff, but it helps you to understand that we practice what we preach. So I remember a few years ago, I was asked to be a speaker at the ASI convention in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. And it was in those days I had an American Express card. I don't have one of those anymore. But anyway, if you bought, they wanted me to be a speaker in Calgary, Alberta. And my parents were living in Montgomery, Idaho, just south of the Canadian border. And we thought, well, we'll make this a little vacation. So they were going to reimburse me for my ticket. But I decided, well, I'll buy one for Kathleen and the 2 kids. And we're going to fly up there. And so I was just thinking, I'm not afraid to fly. I just think God is with us, and it's our time to go. It's time to go, and God's grace will cover us, and so on. So anyway, though I didn't think, on the way up, we're going to be flying right over Old Faithful Geyser in Yellowstone National Park. And if the plane goes down, we're going to crash into one of these boiling cauldrons of hot water. And we're all going to be roasted. And that's going to be the end of it. Now, I've flown on a plane so many times I can just repeat verbatim what they tell you, about where the flight attendants will tell you. There's little lights down the aisle. There's a emergency entrance in the front and on the back. Look around, make sure you're closest to the one you're in. Make sure your seatbelt is on. And you needed oxygen is going to fall from the ceiling. All that kind of stuff. So they're just telling you that's not to make you feel good. If you crash, you're dead. Okay? Occasionally somebody survives, but almost always you're dead. So I thought, if the plane went down over Yellowstone National Park, what would happen to our estate? Because Kathy and I and both the kids are on the same airplane. There's a quirk in the law that says the man of the house takes the last gasp. He's the one that survives. Everybody else, even if we all die in a common accident. That's the way the laws are written. So that would mean that everything was in my estate. And this is what I'm going to tell you. Part of this is going to be humorous, I think, because it should be. But when I bought my tickets, each one of us had $300,000 of life insurance because we bought it through the American Express card and we bought it through a travel agent. So I just thought, we're going to add that up. That's $1.2 million. And then when you add, this is the funny part, our considerable assets to that, we've got a huge estate here. And so what would happen if we died that way? Well, the ways our will was written was that we were going to give 20% of our assets to God. In those days, I did not know what I know now. So I thought God should be thrilled. After all, we're giving him a double time. You see what the point I'm making here? So, at any rate, I thought, well, the rest of it would go to my surviving brothers, and Kathy's brother and sister, and then some of it will go to our parents. Well, they're grown people, they don't really need it. So after I learned what I learned, and really put it in practice. We rewrote our wills completely and turned it completely over. And since we were all dying in a common accident, 20% would go to relatives and 80% would be returned to God. We just turned it completely over. Does that make sense? You understand? Because, grown people really don't need the money. And what would they do with it anyway? Buy themselves a motorhome, sit in their yard 99% of the time. Okay. Let's go on. Will his brother stand by and see him losing his hold of this life, and at the same time robbing the treasure of God? This would be fearful loss to himself and to the cause, for by placing the talent of means in the hands of those who have no regard for the truth, he would be to all intents and purposes wrapping in a napkin, hiding it in the earth, which of course the unfaithful servant. So what should we do? Remember God's ownership. What are the proper uses of money? Does everybody remember what they are? Pretty simple. Our needs, needs of others, needs of what? Cause of God. Pretty interesting. What percent to God? How much does God owe? So you understand what you can afford. The value of present giving. What is the responsibility of children? What should we maximize the gifts and minimize gifts? So I'm going to put it out here so you can see it, and we'll be closing in just a couple minutes. Parents should exercise the right that God has given them. He's entrusted to them the talents he would have them use to his glory. The children were not to become responsible for the talents of the father. By the way, this is grown children, as you know. While they have sound minds and good judgment, here's again testamentary capacity. Parents should, with prayerful consideration and with the help of proper counselors who have experience in the truth and a knowledge of the divine will, make disposition of their property. Now, here's the time when you give it to children. Remember, these are grown children. If you're a young couple and you have little children, you should have a trust to take care of them. There's no question about that. Does everybody understand that? But most people, when they pass away, how old are their kids? They're adults, right? They already have their lives. So if they have children who are afflicted, what is afflicted? You can't work for yourself, you need help, or are struggling in poverty, and will make a judicious use of the means, they should be considered. But if they have unbelieving grown children who have an abundance of this world, they committed good sin against the master who has made them his steward by placing the means in their hands merely because they're their children. So, parents should have great fear in entrusting children with the talents of means that God has placed in their hands unless they have the surest evidence that their children have a greater interest in love for and devotion to the cause of God than they themselves possess. And that these children will be earnest and zealous and forward in the work of God, and more benevolent in carrying forward the various enterprises connected with it, which call for means. But many place their means in the hands of their children, their grown children, thus throwing upon them the responsibility of their own stewardship. Why? Because Satan prompts them to do it. In so doing, they effectively place that means in the enemy's rings. Quite incredible. So if parents, while they live, would assist their children to help themselves, it would be better than to leave them a large amount of debt. Children who are left to rely principally on their own exertions make better men and women and are better fitted for practical life than those children who have depended on their father's estate. Does anybody believe that's a true statement? Yes. This is pretty interesting. Both of our children independently come to Kathy and me and thanked us for teaching them to learn to work. It's pretty impressive. So here it is. This is a repeat of this. Children should always be remembered in wills and trusts if they're dependent and needy, if they're afflicted, if they'll become more liberal with God's cause than the parents were. But no, if they're, these are grown people now, if they're unbelieving, if they have an abundance, and they're serving the world. And you can avoid that by the method I just showed you. This is pretty interesting. Avoiding the terrible mistake, they make a great mistake placing property out of their hands into the hands of their children, while they are themselves responsible for the use of the talent lent them of God. Neither parents or children are made happier by this transfer of property. Well, I'm going to go on here because I want to talk to you about some of the investment things. We want to get over to it. This is the only statement, the time I have this, but I thought I put it in here. If you want to know exactly what the Spirit of Prophecy says about estate planning, not a compilation, Ellen White wrote 2 whole chapters in the Spirit of Prophecy. One of them is volume 3 of the Testimonies, pages 116 and following. The other one is volume 4, page 476 and following. You could look there, find the Ancient Council, and see what it's like. Okay. Understanding worry-free investments. What does the Bible say we should not do? Store up treasures where? On this earth. Why not? It's not safe here. Understanding do. And that's storing up treasures in heaven. Look for a safe place to keep money. Pretty interesting. I'm just going to tell you 1 minute on this interesting story. A principal of one of our schools called me one time and he says, Ed, I know you're an attorney, I'm just a principal, I've never done this before, but I'm the executive of my mother's estate, I have not a clue what to do. Would you be willing to help me? So I said, sure, I'll help you. What kind of help you want? Well, I want to make you the person who's the executor appointed by the court, and you can do this, and I'll just give you the information that you need. So I went there and became administrator of the estate. So he gave me all this stuff. Now here's the story. He said one of her assets was a senior account with Merrill Lynch. You understand Merrill Lynch is the one that's bullish on America. They get this bull, it goes through the maze, it comes right out. Pretty interesting. Knows what's going on. So I wrote Merrill Lynch and I sent to them. I said to Merrill Lynch, her account was in Colorado, I think it's Colorado Springs. Anyway, I wrote this letter and I said, kind of tongue-in-cheek, I said, the part I'm going to tell you is, this lady has passed away. Enclosed is a copy of her death certificate. I have been appointed to be the administrator of the estate. Enclosed is a letter from the judge. And also I've enclosed a copy of her last statement they could find, which is about 3 months old. And I said at that time she had like $12,000 in Merrill Lynch. And then I put, this is the part that I put kind of tongue-in-cheek, knowing that she was you guys are bullish on America, I'm sure it's much more than that now, but this is the latest statement that I have. Please, I'm authorizing you to close out the account, send the proceeds to me so I can, do the execution of the will. So about 3 weeks passed. I knew they got it because I sent it, with return postage, that little card, the little green card that comes back. And I got that back in less than a week. So I knew they had it, but they hadn't responded. So I called them on the phone. And a lot of people are really automated now. The lady called me on the phone. I answered the phone. She's like the receptionist, but she does other stuff too. She answered the phone. And I said, I'm calling on behalf of so-and-so, and this is her account number. Well, she said, so-and-so's handling that account. So she knew right away it was on the computer. So she sent me to this guy in the phone system. So he answered the phone, and I said, I'm Reid, I'm representing this lady. And he said to me, oh, I got your letter, but unfortunately she's made some very bad decisions recently, and she's lost some money in her account. I said, what do you mean she's made decisions? She's been senile for 2 years. She's trusted you to make these decisions. Was that what you think senior account would be? This is interesting. So I said, please close the account, send me the balance. They sent me about $7,800 from $12,000. Now this is kind of interesting because the lady would have been better off with the money buried in the backyard. True? Unless the neighbors had a big dog that liked to dig. I'm telling you, there's no safe places on this earth. It's pretty simple. Now there's more safe places than others, of course, but let me talk to you a little bit about savings versus hoarding. I think we have that. What are the problems of hoarding? Have a huge amount of money, you lose it in a failed economy. There's another one, holding assets too long before they can be utilized. There's a time when you can't buy or sell. This is the problem with hoarding, and it would be documented evidence in the judgment that you were hoarding and they were being unfaithful. So, by the way, what's the difference between hoarding and savings? Anybody know? Yes, exactly. Here's the deal. Savings is saving for a purpose, like saving for your children's education, or saving for emergencies, or whatever. But hoarding, on the other hand, is saving for security, and if you do that, how much do you need? You never have enough. Just pretty simple. Okay, so we'll go on here. The very means that are now so sparingly invested in the cause of God, and that is selfishly retained, will in a little while be cast from all idols to the moles and to the bats. Money will soon depreciate in value very suddenly when the reality of eternal scenes opens to the sense of a man. Now, what does that mean, money will soon depreciate in value very suddenly? We call it a crash. Pretty interesting. Okay, the time is coming when we cannot sell it at price and so on. We've looked at this before. I'm just going to talk to you, this is where we'll have to stop today. I'm going to put it up here quickly because I promised you last time that I would tell you about this. Get-rich-quick schemes. They all have the same 4 principles. And I think we have this on page 36 now where you can fill it in. Get-rich-quick schemes, promise of high returns or wealth, they're all the same. Number B, something you don't really understand. You must risk the money that you can't afford to lose, and you have to make a quick decision. When does get-rich-quick schemes come to the average church? In the winter. So it's going to be sundown very soon. And it could be that one of your friends has learned about this awesome opportunity to make money. And they will tell you, why don't you come to our place for popcorn and pizza? We've got something wonderful to tell you about. And you're going to be making money in the 5 figures before too long. Or you might be driving in a new pink Cadillac or something like that. There's no way to know all the benefits that you will have. But the problem is, all get-rich-quick schemes are told by their friends to them, who sincerely believe they're doing them a favor. So I'm going to tell you about one now that was told by a friend. A man who had retired from the General Conference, a man that I knew, and I was certain I'd tell you his name, was many years ago, so you would never guess it. He called me up and he said, a friend just told me about this thing he'd seen in Popular Mechanics magazine. And he said that a man was trying to get some money together to refurbish a big dredge up in Alaska for gold mining. Now, most of you know that in 1849 there was a gold rush in California. People went all over America, went racing out to California to get their gold. I mean, they found gold laying right on top of the ground. This is incredible. The amazing thing is then they started building these big, huge machines that were on a barge, and they would throw dirt and gravel and rocks on the front of it, put it up and run it down through a sluice box, and the gold would drop at the bottom, and they would just pick the nuggets out. I mean, this is incredible. Does anybody know why the gold rush fizzled? They found gold in Alaska. They went running up there. But anyway, they said in Alaska, you go up the Yukon River, and in the rivers there, and these big dredges have gone up and gone through the whole thing. Well, guys said, you know, that was so primitive. Now we've got all kinds of technology. We can just turn these dredges around, refit it, and go back down to the same river and just get gold like a killing. All we need is $100,000 to do this dredge. And then we're going to be able to be, you're going to be rolling in the gravy. So he said, all I need is 10 people to give me 10,000. We're going to do this. So this man called me and he said, I've got this wonderful opportunity to make some extra money. Who wouldn't want to supplement their income in retirement? So I said, you're married, aren't you? And he said, yes. I'm going to tell you guys a secret. Whether your spouse knows anything about money management, God gave you that person to keep you from doing stupid stuff. It's really true. So I said, well, bring your wife and come on in. He said he wanted me to convince his wife he should do this, you understand. So he came inside of my office and his wife was there. So he went through this whole scenario. And I said to his wife, what do you think about it? I shouldn't have asked that question because she started sobbing and tears were coming down her cheeks. And she said, we've just paid our house off. We don't have $10,000 to spare. He wants to get a line of credit on our house and put the house in hock again so we can put the money up there. And I just don't think we should do it. I said to the man, that's your answer. Don't do it. God gave you that person to keep you from doing stupid stuff. So about 3 weeks later, the man called me back and he says, thank God what you told me. The man was a crook. He got $10,000 from 10 people, but instead of going to Alaska, he went to Mexico. And everybody's out there money. Do you understand? It was a hoax from the very beginning. Now this is incredible. So he says, you saved my life, you saved my marriage, you saved, my finances are going to be much better, and so on. The point is, you have to be very, very careful. So, someone's going to promise you high returns, something you don't really understand. You've got to miss money that you can't afford to lose. And the final one, your friends will tell you Saturday night, we're going to give you till Monday to make a decision if you want to be in on the ground floor with the rest of us, or otherwise you're going to forfeit this great privilege. Have you ever heard that? In short time. They're all right there. Pretty interesting. Okay. I'll just give this one to you. The best places, government-backed securities, in spite of the fact the government is $18 trillion in debt because they can print more money. You want to have something that has FDIC insurance if you insure it. By the way, the stock market is not insured. Mutual funds are not insured. If you have money in the stock market, you could wake up tomorrow broke. It could all be gone. Is this true? Important to know. Okay, so government-backed securities, church investments like the Southern Union Revolving Fund, projects to advance the cause of God, helping the education of workers. Those are the kinds of things. So, our time is up, but I want to tell you a quick story. When I went to law school, I did not go as a young man. I went to law school at age 40. And I commuted from Calvin, Georgia to Atlanta every day for 3 years, 4 days a week. I wore out 2 cars, listened to lots of law tapes going back and forth, and sermon tapes and so on. Anyway, when I finished, getting through law school is one thing, but passing the bar exam is something very different, as you may know. So, the year I took the bar exam, only 35% of the people who took it passed it. How are you going to be one of the people who passes? I will just tell you now that it was the most traumatic thing I've ever done in my life. When I took the bar exam, the first day is the multi-state exam, which is 200 multiple choice questions, and they're the kind that makes Pavlov's dogs whine. I mean, you just wonder why in the world would someone ask this question, because you know that the one that seems right is not right. You've got to figure out one of the other three which one is right. Well, anyway, the next day is the portion where it's the Georgia exam, and it just gives you like 7 or 8 fact patterns that discuss the legal implications. And you have to think of 3 years of law school, you've got to put all the answers you can possibly think of, and your hand gets so tight, you can't use a computer because you might have answers on your computer, so you have to write it along into these blue books. And you don't learn until 90 days afterward whether you failed or passed. So the day came 90 days afterward. I didn't ask a soul, what did you do? Because I knew if they told me something I didn't see, and they may not even have the same test I did, it would make me really nervous. So the day that the exam came, by the way, we had been told that if you pass, you're going to get this big 8.5 by 11 manila envelope with all the information about how you go to the Superior Court, get sworn in, and all that stuff. If you didn't pass, you get us a number 10 business envelope that says, sorry you didn't pass, the next exam is given in 90 days. So on the day that the exam, and by the way, they said, don't call us. They're all going to be mailed out on a certain day. And by the way, 2 days after that, it's going to be in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, which covers Dixie like they do, so everybody in the country is going to know whether you passed or failed. So, this is kind of hard for me to tell you, but it's going to make a big point. The day it came, I called Kathy. I was at the office, and I said, Kathy, don't get the mail, let me get it. So I went home, and I was waiting at the mailbox when the mailman came by, because when I got there, I anticipated there would be mail, but there wasn't anything, so well, he's not here yet. So I waited in our driveway until he came by, and he put it in, waved to me as he went on by, and I looked in there, and there were letters, but there was no big manila envelope, so I knew I'd failed. But anyway, there was one letter from the Board of Bar Examiners, and it was the number 10 business envelope. So I opened it up and pulled it up and said, I was so nervous I had to sit down. I could not even stand. So, Pete, and it said, congratulations, you passed the Georgia bar. And then it said, under new regulations, we'll be sending you the rest of the stuff in another envelope. So I was so scared. Please understand, nobody boasts that they passed the bar. Do you understand that? So I didn't know that I did. Because there's 10,000 attorneys in Atlanta, and they help to grade the papers. Do you think they want more competition? No way. So you got to pretty well do a good job or you're not going to make it. So, good luck in your practice. Those were some of the most wonderful words I ever saw. I'll tell you other words I've never forgotten. Kathy and I were engaged. I went to Kathy's family and I said to them, you know, Kathy and I have been dating and so on, and I'm studying for the ministry. I have no student loans and I have a job at the Gulf States Conference and so on. And I'd like to have your permission for Kathy to marry me. It was real quiet. And I thought, mercy, they're not going to say yes. And so Kathy's mother spoke first and she said, this is the exact words now. We always let our children make their own mistakes. That's what she said. What she really meant was, Kathy loves you, we love you too. But that isn't what she said. Never forget that. I've said that to tell you this. God has told us, to those who manage their money Christianly, when he returns, he will say, well done, good and faithful servant. Those are the words I really want to hear about you. Do you get the point? That's the whole reason I told you that story, is to help you to understand that we can all hear those words, not just graduates of law school, not just people that are getting married. Anybody in the world can hear those words, well done, good and faithful servant. If they've been faithful to God, if they're real bigger and bigger so we can trust God at the end, you understand the whole scenario. So my goal as a Christian is to take what God has given me in time, money, talents, all the things that Heidi told the kids about today, and make sure that I utilize it for the glory of God and advancement of the kingdom. That's the whole point. Well, thank you guys for being so interested in coming here today. I hope it's been helpful for you. And I want God to bless you, each one. Your families, you represent your whole families here, your church family, and so on. Can we have a prayer together again? I want to pray for you before I go. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your love for each of us. We pray that you will guide us in our lives. Help us to understand that you've given us this information for our own benefit and for the opportunity to serve you. We pray that you will guide each of us in our lives. May we be faithful till you come again. And we pray that you'll bless us all in Jesus' name. Amen.